Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Jumped and Bakugou Picked Up the Pieces? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Bakugou Katsuki didn't miss things. In fact, he hardly cared about things which weren't hero-oriented. Yet, as he stared at the limp body he was cradling, he decided that perhaps he did care about certain things. The lump situated in the heart of his throat was a painful reminder that maybe he did care about certain things with constellation freckles. And that maybe green wasn't such a shitty color after all. Kachin also had a nice ring to it, only if he squinted though. But as his palms continued to be painted with red, he thought that perhaps it was too late to make this realization. Bakugou sat, bathed in blue and red lights, for a long time after that. The dried crimson partnered with the echoing crack of a skull rang in his head. Red was never a nice color, one slice. Another. He smelt the color red before he saw it, and again he loathed the color red. And again. And again. Bakugou Katsuki never knew that two letters could leave such a bitter taste in his mouth. He had pursued the towering building for years, maybe, before he was even in the womb. Yet with every step towards the university, he felt despair nip at his skin. The scent of anesthetic burrowed at his skin. Bakugou hated to admit it. He felt self-conscious at the idea of smelling like the painted white walls of the hospital waiting room. He had never been a big fan of hospitals in the first place, but he grew to hate them even more, despite the sense of familiarity it brought. The scorch marks. The scars. Everything and everyone was vulnerable in those white rooms. It was as if nothing could escape the glowering lights of the hospital, and slipping away from its penetrative limelight would prove to be futile. The blonde had tried to push the sense of insecurity to the back of his thoughts for a while, but still, some part of him was always etched with regret. It was obvious, however, that he had visited the hospital earlier this morning. The regular visits to the hospital meant that he carried around its odors. The metallic tang from stainless steel in the open air, bleach wafting from bedding, blood, vomit. It was too late for him to pretend that it had been his first hospital visit, but he would pretend that it hadn't been his most rushed. And maybe, he had been escorted by security this time around, only able to send Inko a sheepish smile as she passed him during her shift. "Good luck on your first day, sweetie. Plus ultra?" She had called out with a limp fist pumped to the air. He had sent her a wry smile before feeling the security guards tug at his elbow again, signaling that he had to move. This was typical. Bakugou had become a constant variable within the building. He was always there, always finding ways to slip into the hospital room, to get another feel for guilt. He hovered continuously, as if he were a moth desperate for light, but he was instead desperate for a sense of release. Moths, they don't stop till they've drained their life source, and the younger feared he'd follow suit. Perhaps he was doomed from the start. Because, despite each visit leaving him more defenseless than the last, he still salvaged the small moments he had with the younger. The blonde had made sure to never miss a day. Maybe, that was why his eye bags grew darker these past few weeks, and if his mother had noticed the obvious changes, she hadn't made any boisterous remarks or poked fun as expected of her. Instead, she'd remained reserved and looked from a distance. No more curse-filled conversations. No more random excursions to the grocery stores in the dead hours of the night. No more words exchanged back and forth during the dinner table. He couldn't even attempt to lift his fork to his mouth, so why bother engaging in meaningless small talk? And so the lights were switched off at midnight, and his bed found him curled within himself, with nothing different from the other days. But as much as Bakugou hated admitting it, he missed it, their playful nature. The house grew dim and lifeless every time he stepped in, as if he had a bad omen fused to him that plagued the thoughts of every inhabitant of their household. He didn't want to bring up the issue because it was painfully obvious who the culprit was. Despite that, he stood outside the 1A classroom with a crisp white shirt and baggy trousers. And still he wasn't pleased. Nor was he satisfied despite not being a man of typically refined tastes. The doors were massive, and honestly Bakugou found their enormous stature pointless and over-exaggerated. He refused to complain any longer. This was UA at the end of the day. And if he complained, it meant that everything he had put the boy through beforehand was pointless. The sun stretched across the room, cloaking the wooden surface of the desks with light. The blonde did a quick scout of the room before releasing nothing more than a grunt of acknowledgement. Guess that's my FNG seat for now. He thoughtlessly swung his backpack over a random chair before throwing his legs on top of its accompanying wooden desk. He leaned back, allowing the sunlight to swallow him with gold. He almost looked peaceful in the lighting, ignoring the obvious eye bags, or perhaps he just simply looked peaceful since his mouth was shut. Maybe I can catch up on sleep here. No NC classmate is here yet, he reprimanded himself, and after a few moments of silence he felt himself slowly drifting away, the morning buzz aiding his tired case. Hey, this sheet is actually kinda. There was a loud gasp followed by a lot hand movements when Bakugou finally cracked his eyes open. He groaned as he attempted to close his eyes again, only for the yapping to become louder. What? He hissed, his expression blank. This desk is dash. What about it? Is it yours? 'Cause I'm pretty effing sure that this is the first day? So this sheet can't be yours, can it? He looked up from his eyelashes, red eyes piercing through the now uncomfortable silence. What atrocious behavior! What I meant to say is that this is the desk of our upperclassman dash. So what? So what? The boy repeated, mouth agape. The hand motions paired with the screech of a voice the latter had, was starting to piss Bakugou off. We must treat it with the same amount of respect they gave it. It's only to be expected. You are not portraying the qualities expected of a UA student. Please refrain from being rude in the future. The boy had made sure to emphasize the not in his sentence by throwing even more hand gestures. Huh? Who says we'll even be FNG interacting? In the future dash. We are in the same class after all, it's only to be expected. Shut up about this expected crap. It's not what I want, so it won't happen. Got it? Bakugou groaned, blatantly ignoring the wide eyes of the onlookers who were idly watching the scene. The question must have thrown the blue-haired student off guard enough as it allowed Bakugou to rotate and face the window, nonchalantly ignoring the spluttering complaints of Four Eyes. His therapist, he would learn Four Eyes' proper name tomorrow. But in his honest opinion, Four Eyes suited him more than any name his rich prick parents gave him. But deep in the cages of his ribs, his heart clenched involuntarily. The ushering and bustling of the blue-haired student seemed far too similar to the actions of a familiar and caring freckled boy. And, though it took a few minutes, the whispering died down and Bakugou turned back around soon after. Casually laying his chin on the palms of his hands, he caught sight of what appeared to be their homeroom teacher. It may as well have been a homeless man, but he couldn't be bothered with the details. Bakugou just appreciated that his presence stopped the mindless taunts his classmates were most likely thinking. They already know how much of an a-hole you are, Kachin. Slender fingers curled around his face, cupping it harshly. Bakugou remained still, rooted, trying his hardest to ignore the tightening of their grip and not turn around. Don't tell me that you're afraid of me now? Not here. He didn't want to see the shredded dark figure once again. He didn't want to see a bloodied pair of limbs. He didn't want it to happen here. That didn't seem to be a problem, as when the hands left, he didn't even notice. They had left in silence. Its departure had allowed his breathing to regain stability, though he still sounded slightly labored. Time had been wrenched temporarily. The authority to teach outside the UA guidelines dash. The sound of a skull echoed in the back of mind. With that said, get geared up. A voice interrupted his depressive stupor. Right. He was still in class. I want to see you in the PE grounds with your training uniform. He stood up hastily, barely catching a glimpse of the reflection of the empty desk behind him. It felt unnecessarily empty, as if a missing piece from a puzzle was torn out. The changing room wasn't much, nor was it very thrilling. The male classmates were buzzing with excitement and hormones, only pausing at the arrival of a student who was long overdue. Lavender hair seemed to stand up by itself, and the boy twisted his neck to PP his eyebrows. It looked ridiculous from Bakugou's perspective. But then again, everything did. I think your eye bags could rival mine. The latter's lip quivered into a smirk when he caught him staring. The blonde scoffed and turned back to his locker, slamming it shut. However, the sudden movement caused an envelope to flutter to his feet, which the blonde quickly hurried to sweep back into his pocket, only earning a raised eyebrow from the student in the process. Mind your FING business. Bakugou pushed past him with a scowl, not bothering to turn around and gaze as his hands raised in mock surrender. What's this? Bakugou had been forced out of Izuku's bedchambers yet again and was met by Inko instead of the usual empty waiting room. It was currently the evening and the end of visiting hours. She ignored his question and continued offering the envelope with a sad smile. Reluctantly, he plucked it from her grasp and raised an eyebrow before noticing the handwriting. It was Izuku's. Auntie. It's for you. I found it on the table that day before I received the call. But Bakugou already knew the day she was referring to. Who could forget? Who could forget the flurry of limbs and ambulances? Who could forget the dried patch mark in front of their school building? The pained smile. I didn't need to open it to know. I heard the phone ringing from the living room and something in me just knew. He'd been acting differently. I should have known, honestly. Bakugou replicated her sad smile as he looked down at the unopened envelope with the neat Takachin engraved in his typical handwriting at the front. Why now? I already read mine. In fact, I read it before I answered the phone. She sighed. Slowly, Inko made her way to an unoccupied seat before continuing. Bakugou followed. He had wanted me to read it after he died. He had really expected to die that day, Katsuki. If you hadn't been there. She trailed off and he was glad. If he wasn't such an a-hole, he wouldn't have needed to be there. None of them would have. It's been 3 months, so Annie. Why are you giving me this now? He surprised even himself by how gentle he sounded. Perhaps the months really had taken a toll on him. Foreclosure. I don't think he's going to make it. Said with such acceptance, but perhaps it had been feigned. His heart started hammering, fighting to break free from his chest. He could barely hear his own breathing over the constant beating. Auntie. She stopped him with a sob, wrenching from her throat. I hate being pessimistic, Kat, but it's been 3 months. 3 very long months, and I'm tired of hanging on a thin string of hope. And it's very thin. She exhaled. Bakugou wished he had communicated more with his old man, then maybe he would know how to comfort someone. Instead, he settled for awkwardly stealing glances at Inko from his peripheral vision. She had lost a son he had lost. Well, he didn't know what to call them anymore. If he wanted to wake up, he'd fight for it. He'd make an effort. Any effort. That's how Izuku is or was. She took another shuddering breath. He always had that fighting spirit before. The bullying. She had only been made aware after the scars, and perhaps Izuku had briefly mentioned it in his letter. Though he heavily doubted this, Izuku would hate for anyone to have to actually deal with consequences that he found undeserved. Bakugou selfishly wondered if he had a section in her letter. Call him weak, but he didn't want to break the news to her. Not now. And definitely not like this. Andy, please. Unfortunately, I can't unread that letter, Kat. I just wanted to give you his letter. His fists tightened around the envelope, unblinked tears threatening to fall. He clenched his teeth. It feels like we've lost. No one has lost, Katsuki. I just hope Izuku is finally happy. They sat in solemn silence after those words. No more words were exchanged, and yet they both felt understood. The grounds looked like any Japanese sports ground, though it was significantly larger. He found himself wondering if he had put Uda on too much of a pedestal, if his actions leading up to this very moment were even worth it. Bakugou tightened his hold on the envelope at this thought, keeping it in a vice-like grip as if afraid the wind would carry it away. He never opened it, and he probably never would. But that didn't mean he wished to lose it. We'll be assessing quirks. I tend to evaluate the abilities of my students on their first day. I want to see the foundation I'm working with. Bakugou. The man threw a ball towards him, snapping him from a desolate trance. The blonde looked up, expressionless, his palms heavy. Since you scored the highest in the entrance exam, what was the furthest you could throw in middle school? 67 meters. Whoa, Kachin is so cool. He felt the breathy whispers of the wind and twitched. This was the result for your standard no quirk allowed gym tests, right? Bakugou nodded stiffly. Great. Try it with your quirk. The blonde walked towards the man slowly as if he was being cautious of his surroundings for once. But Bakugou was explosive through and through. His presence had always been enough to assert any dominance, and he knew it. So, he wasn't quite certain what his reason for being cautious was. Soon enough he felt the telltale sound that his quirk was activating, flickering in his palms and the slow warming up of his muscles as he began to clench the ball. The blonde threw one look of pity to the direction he heard the breath of air from before launching the ball. Die! The ball was gone. A single shine spot flew above several trees before disappearing. A sigh of relief left him. Can't kill the dead. I thought you knew that already, Kachin. Bakugou froze, barely hearing his time nor the murmurs of amazement from his peers. This voice, however, didn't match the freckled smile. It was bitter and filled with uncharacteristic anger. Did that feel good? Taking your anger on something since, you know I haven't been there to be a punching bag for you anymore. I mean I am there, aren't I? Just not in any condition to take any beatings. Why couldn't you just finish the J? The ghost fingers gently traced his collarbone and Bakugou had to physically tear himself away from the ball-throwing compartment to march back to his initial space. The hallucinations always went away if he ignored them, though sometimes he found himself listening. Listening to their taunts was better than falling victim to his own mind. But now was not the time. This is fun. The man glowered, now looking pretty sad from his standards, someone's hyped energy suddenly causing the older man distress. Bakugou winced. He ought to learn his homeroom teacher's name soon, and whilst he was at it stop his mind from wandering off. Fine, let's make this fun. Whoever comes last during this quirk apprehension test will be expelled. He had lost himself in his guilt for only a few seconds, and somehow his shitty classmates had managed to bother the sheet of his new homeroom teacher. But still, Bakugou couldn't help but let a snarky huff escape. This is complete and utter bullshit. There's no way he has that much authority. You can't do that. Yeah, we got in fair and square. We all passed the entrance exadash. Passing is one thing, maintaining your position, however, his eyes glazed over the cluster of students, is another thing. You wouldn't be the first class I expelled, and you probably won't be my last one either. The complaints came to a sudden halt as everyone understood the sincerity of the teacher. Bakugou felt his lip quirk as his competitive nature took over. He could take on a challenge. In fact, he needed a challenge. The others had put up more of a fight than he had expected, and it took his mind off the obvious issue. Only the 50 meters sprint test was remaining, and so far the whispering had stopped. Although, he was disappointed with where he stood in the leaderboard so far. Third. All because he was preoccupied with him. He was rendered next to nothing because he was constantly occupying his mind. His headspace. On his first FANG day. It was as if he was a virus. You're the one imagining it. Why are you always blaming me? Bakugou shook his head as if trying to dispose of the latter option. Midoriya no longer sounded bitter. He sounded sad, tone dripping with sincerity. And it hurt. His thoughts and the voices were merging, and he needed a lifeline. I'm not. It's not that you're not real. Then why won't you look at me? Bakugou hated this. He felt worn out, exhausted, and finally found himself regretting not having stayed in bed for a few minutes longer. He had so desperately wanted to hear Izuku's heart beat that he settled for the hospital seat near his bed. He had needed the notion that he was still alive. Stable. But he lost himself within that promise of security. He no longer had any sense of stability. Look at me. Look at what you did to me, Kachin. Hey, Bakugou, it's your turn for the 50 meters sprint, soon. Bakugou turned his attention to the classmate beside him, though he found himself looking up slightly. He was quite large despite his soft features. It's why your turn soon. He nodded and made his way over to the starting line when he felt a subtle yet rough hand on his shoulder, almost like the hands of his grandfather who had been a gardener before passing away. Gardeners had the ability to deal with the harshest conditions with a simple soft touch and care. It was as fascinating as it was unrealistic. Some things were untamable, as much as his grandfather attempted to disprove it. I said as soon. There's still one more pair before us. I knew that, shitty extra. He tried to push past him only for him to get restrained by a few birds. Are sure that you're okay? He was stuttering, but Bakugou could still make out his words clearly. Kachin. His body seemed rippled to ripple back, thrashing aggressively as the rough, wide, muscular build with dark skin melted into pale freckled skin and a wide grin. He looked up at him with doe eyes and mouth slightly apart. Kachin, are you okay? It's not him. He's not him. Everyone has that same smile, right? I'm fine, Fu, goddammit. Leave me alone. The blonde cursed, stalking over to the side of the startup line, whilst his classmate scurried off with a small, sorry. Nothing ever changes, does it? This time Bakugou didn't know who uttered those words. Enough, however, it was his turn. He ignored the other students' constant worrying glances, only focusing on the anticipated whistle. The moment it went off, he was off. Sprinting. Dashing. Straight to the finish line. The wind felt great along his skin, and that's when it happened. Waiting at the finish line was a distorted figure. His distorted figure. Bakugou repressed the scream threatening to rip from his throat and continued to push himself. One more second. He ran into the deformed form of his previous childhood friend, ignoring the way its smile widened. Bakugou gasped as he crossed the line, as if it was his first breath, and numbly stood still before looking at Aizawa for his score. 4.13 seconds. He attempted a smirk, but it fell short. You all right, man? He just nodded weakly, rotating shifts with the classmate who had questioned him. He hadn't bothered to look them in the eyes, but once he had caught sight of the red in their hair, he decided that maybe it was for the best. If you say so. Nonetheless, he walked past with his mind unable to do anything but drift towards the hospitalized boy. Why? Why you, goddammit? It was only a matter of time till it would slowly crumble into, why won't you actually come back? The rest of the school day just blurred itself into a few minutes. He barely even knew when he had exited the train and arrived back in front of the hospital room. It was an instinct, a reflex, a depressing reminder. Hey! He hesitated. Nerd. No reply. He opened the door wider, slipping in gently. The room was wide. God, was it large? So much that it swallowed the small bed that it surrounded. The blonde let out a shuddering breath, and it echoed briefly. It was my first day today. At UA, I tried to tell you this morning, but I was thrown out so yeah. Bakugou slowly made his way to his familiarized seat, shoving his hands into his pockets as he did so. We have a FING pro hero as our homeroom teacher. He trailed off, throat drying. I bet you would have loved that. So wake up. Wake the F up and then I can introduce you to him. Though I've got to warn you, the fucker isn't much of a dresser, so I'll need to warn him a few weeks in advance. He had finally caught on to the teacher's name during the day when passing the teacher's lounge. You would have probably been reeking of nerdiness over him, you little sheet. ING Racerhead isn't that cool. But he's a hero and that's all that matters, he snorted lightly. Though, it lacked any humor. Hey nerd. Are you there? No reply. He made us do this sort of test and, you were everywhere. They were supposed to have stopped by now. He continued and looked out of the window briefly. My parents say that those are hallucinations, that they aren't you. They always look so, worried? For God's sake, even my therapist says it too. And I know that it's not you. Ever since the incident, as he liked to address it, Bakugou had a common visitor in his peripherals. At first he had thought it to be the ghost of Midoriya. A quirk. A miracle. But that light soon dimmed and he found himself wrong when the visitor would spit bitter words at him. His therapist hadn't been too surprised, but his parents didn't seem to understand the extent of his visions. There had been nights he awoke with his throat dry and his bed covered in soot. But as always, they brushed it off to his temper. And he was glad for their dismissal. It meant he didn't have to explain why he blamed himself for the cause of the incident. The blonde was projecting, and the freckled boy became a visual representation of guilt for him. Every insecurity he had, Midoriya would make sure to make it sting 10 times worse. But the blonde never got angry at him. Not anymore anyways. At first they would have a screaming match, but it only made him appear mad and delusional. So he quietened his rage, allowing his blood to boil and his heart to pound like thunder trapped in a jar. After all, it was his own thoughts being thrown at him. Bakugou looked back down with a sad smile, brushing green curls from his forehead. They can't replicate your smile, right? And they always miss the shitty freckle patch you have behind your ears. I know that it's not you. But never mind. Even as he stood by the soulless body, he couldn't form words. Silence. You would have loved my shitty classmates too. The sparkly one tripped halfway through the air during the sprint and he snorted whilst reminiscing the way the student had rolled outside the track after falling. Bakugou fell silent, once more. Hey, Izuku. Are you here yet? More silence followed. Wake up, please, idiot. He collapsed onto his chest, tears threatening to stain Midoriya's hospital gown. The hold on the duvet tightened. It's nearly been a year. We miss you. I miss you. Then more quietly. I'm sorry. I'm so effing sorry. When he left the hospital that night, somehow it felt colder, as if he had walked away from something bigger. He dared to steal a quick glance at his cupboard. It was closed. But it was so close. His fingers twitch, itching for the sensation of relief. Relief and justice. Just one slice. It was a promise he knew he could make. Just one slice. Liar. There were countless visits similar to the last one throughout the next week. The blonde repeated his previous cycle of doting over the younger, making sure to be his last visitor of the day whenever he could. Not that that was hard to accomplish. But still, Bakugou was as persistent as he'd been for the past year. And he was midway through brushing Midoriya's teeth when Inko stumbled in. Izuku, baby? I'm coming in, Katsuki. Bakugou jumped upon hearing his name. Hey, auntie. I don't want to ask, but I'm afraid I might have to. She gave him a disapproving look and he straightened himself out before offering her a weak wave. Not what I was looking for, Kat. He rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. It's just that you seemed, he was a spluttering mess and he could feel the tip of his ears redden. Busy and Kat. I read somewhere that even if you're in a if you're in a coma you still have to maintain your FING hygiene and that nurses often Kat. He continued. Use like this type of antibacterial mouthwash to floss their patients. IG got the exact brand too. He hurried to rummage through his backpack and retrieved a clear bottle of mouthwash, causing the red liquid to slosh around. I haven't been doing this for long. Only a few days now and I've also been cleaning out his shitty gums, so don't Katsuki. He stopped bouncing his leg. I understand that you miss him. We all do. But even he's living more than you right now and she sighed, rubbing her temple with a frown. He's my baby. It doesn't matter how tired or busy I am. I always find time for him. Holding her hand out, she gestured for the item in his hand whilst slowly gazing over the floss he was holding over her son's open mouth. As much as I'm thankful for all your hard work, this isn't something a child should be occupied with. But Andy no toots. Now go have fun. Do what kids your age do. She ushered him out, patting his shoulders reassuringly. Surely, you and your friends can meet up later today? He didn't have any friends. Nor did he have anything to do after school. Bakugou found it unfair that he had forced Midoriya into SBMSN and believed he had no right to outwardly seek comfort and friendship since he prevented Izuku from doing so himself. It was only fair. That's why when he closed the door to his house it suddenly fell silent. Very silent. Who's there? We own a gun, you know. They did not own a gun, he knew that for a fact. His mother with a weapon other than a wooden spoon would be unbreachable. Bakugou rolled his eyes, kicking his shoes off and making his way up the stairs after slipping on his slippers. I'm home. There was a beat, then the hurried sound of footsteps. At the foot of the staircase stood his mother with a confused expression that quickly turned into pursed lips, as if she was racking her brain for some unsaid information. Brat? You're home early? Did you forget something here? Bakugou shook his head with a frown. Oh shit. Is it your therapy session and I forgot? Shit, let me get my keys. Honey, I've got to drop . It's fine, Auntie just sent me home. I'll be in my room if you need me. She froze and looked at her husband, who had also gathered by the entrance once Bakugou disappeared into the hallway. Did he just call me Mum? Inko hadn't simply sent him home. She had banned him too. He was expected to return in a week's time and have the rest of the week to rest. If not, the break would lengthen itself. He was certain that the security guards were currently singing her praises. But Bakugou no longer had the repetitive beating of Midoriya's heart to lull him to sleep, and he didn't know whether he was grateful or not. School was the only thing that broke him from his repetitive cycle: sleep, eat, train, repeat. Excluding therapy with Dr. Suzuki. And the school week had been uneventful. Additionally, not visiting the boy had taken a toll on him, as foreseen by everyone. Even his therapist was aware of the reduced visiting hours and picked up on his unusual aggression. I heard that you have more time to yourself, says Hifinhu. Shouldn't you be minding your own effing business anyways? Since when did my business start looking like FING free real estate? Language. And they were back to square one. Bakugou had refused to make eye contact with her and just focused on her displayed achievements as a psychologist. Red and blue ribbons hung across the room, adorning it with praise and colors that for some reason tore at his heart. Well, it is my job to help you overcome your emotional constipation, even if it means invading your privacy sometimes. She smirked slightly as she reclined into the comfort of her love seat, pen lowered as she raised a perfectly trimmed eyebrow. He would have found himself reciprocating her smirk, but she was far too bold and brash, and it reminded him of someone he once admired too. I get that your job is to psychoanalyze some weirdos that have nothing to do with their life but to mope, but I'm honestly fine. In fact, I'm better than FANG fine. I'm great. He slammed his palm onto the table, allowing them to flicker. No quirks allowed here, remember Bakugou? But you're effing sedash. Language. Sit down and don't make me tell you again. He shut his mouth and made his way back to his seat. Seriously, Katsuki, you were making amazing progress, and still are. Don't get me wrong, the road to recovery isn't always achievable. But you were opening up instead of repressing any emotion that isn't anger. Her sigh of disappointment made him glower. Her emotional arsenal. Like he'd give into it. Repressing builds up pent-up anger because you feel like you shouldn't express it. That turns into stress and... She glossed over his charts, lips pursed in concern. Your quirk becomes unbearable because of the extreme amount of production of nitroglycerin in your palms. In reality, you're hurting yourself more than anyone, Katsuki. Don't act like you know me. She put down the sheets with a quiet thump, interrupting him. Maybe I don't. But these charts sure do. And so does my desk apparently. The both of them turned their attention to the burned handprints ingrained on her desk. A PRGNT pause. Old hag told you, didn't she? About the free time. It hurt to utter those words, but when the therapist nodded, he released an aggravated sigh. He was making Midoriya sound like a burden he had to bear. But it was the other way around. Knew it. She can't shut her mouth. She hummed. After another moment he spoke up again. Auntie is preventing me from visiting. Freckles. When they had first started their sessions, Bakugou refused to reveal anyone's names and instead gave them nicknames and labels, though he had assumed that she already knew who he was referring to. It was hard for anyone in Mustafu to not put the piece together. Oh, well, surely she must have a reason? She doesn't seem like an unreasonable person. People change. He had wanted to sound bitter and spiteful, but instead sounded upset. People change, and maybe I'm not one of those people. Dr. Suzuki was patiently tapping her pen on the tabletop. She looked up from her files for a split second before sighing. Well, what did she say? That maybe I should make some FNG friends and stop being FNG loner. What did she say exactly? She sighed. That I was too preoccupied with his freckles and to go do what kids my age do, which I think is FING ridiculous because I'm already training to be a hero and not every kid my age does that. She makes a good point, Katsuki. She leaned forward, interrupting his rant, elbows placed on her desk with a tight smile. You are right in a sense that not every kid is training to be a hero, to be on the same pedestal as the symbol of peace. But Those who are, just like you, still manage to balance work with their social life. Take your classmates for example. When the doctor received no answer, she let a short exasperated sigh leave as she broke into a grin. And, I hate to be the one to break it to you, but you've been pretty freckle-centric these past weeks. T-. What I meant to say is that maybe this time apart will be good for you. It'll give you time to reflect on yourself. The session was ending when his therapist began looking at him, as if contemplating her words. Katsuki? He hummed, swinging his backpack over his shoulder. But she looked unsure. You've been taking the medication, right? He nodded. And the hallucinations have stopped, right? He didn't answer. Time to reflect on myself, my arse. It was the end of the school week and he still hadn't managed to persuade Inko otherwise. Every futile attempt made him more and more unbearable to his classmates. Even All Might's presence couldn't soothe his anger. In fact, his high-spirited attitude seemed to amplify his grouchiness. Class 1A had changed into their hero costumes and gathered at Groundsby when All Might burst through the clouds, leaving a trail of smoke as he landed. He, obviously, threw the students his typical commercialized smile before speaking his token words. I am here. Bakugou glowered throughout his explanation of the battle trial. All Might's clarification of the task was crooked, but he understood in simpler terms that it was a hero versus villain assessment. Two opposing sides, one guarding a nuclear weapon and the other having the task of either restraining the villain or capturing the deadly device. He planned on just winning. It was simple enough. He didn't understand why the old man couldn't dumb it down. They had selected slots in the lottery and Bakugou found himself being the designated villain. Ironic, right, Kachin? The whispering quickly blended in with his breathing. But he was no unknowing victim, having been targeted by those illusions for a while, and soon enough he had patched himself up only to be impatiently waiting for another headache. His partner. It felt fraudulent to call anyone else that. Bakugou grunted disinterestedly at the idea and idle chatter around him until a student approached him with a wry smile. What? The student smirked slightly as he looked down at his card, then back up at Bakugou. A brief nod of his head told Bakugou all he needed to know. Howdy, partner. Foe. Bakugou began to walk away, hands in pockets. Alright, I get that you don't like me very much. The only thing the universe was doing was testing him. Time and time again he'd been forced into less than agreeable situations. And again here he was time to reflect on myself, my arse. That's the FING understatement of the year. Bakugou snarled, continuing to march out of the room. They were the first team to be assessed and he was not thrilled to have to face Four Eyes again. Nor Eyebags. Now that he thought about it, their names were oriented around their eyes a lot. Weirdos. But we're a team, come on. And I thought that we were chill, man. Eyebags groaned as he pursued him out of the door, hand reaching. What the hell did I even do? Don't walk away from me, you're being effing Inko. Bakugou swiveled on his heels and faced him, aggressively jabbing index finger to his chest. You don't what to do. He spun back around without looking and disappeared into the hallway. FING Eyebags, FING underestimating me. I can handle these weaklings alone. Bakugou continued spitting strings of insults as he turned the nearest corner. They had been assigned against Four Eyes and Ural, Pink Cheeks, who were the designated heroes for this task. He knew that he had the capability of destroying those shitty extras without the need of a partner. However, the universe loved FNG with him, and so he found himself with 3 annoying assholes on his case. The hallway was weird, and definitely made out of metal, and not the cheap kind. Bakugou wondered what was so realistic about it. They were supposedly in a mundane city, and yet he had never seen a building such as this back where he lived, long, unwinding hallways with little signs of life. Mustafa must be a small town. A soft buzz came from his earpiece. Bakugou? Can you hear me? Will you leave me alone if I say yes? There was an uncomfortable silence. That's what IFNG thought. He continued walking in silence. The silence was disturbing him, somewhat. Isn't this what you wanted, Kachin? He bared his teeth, continuing with the search despite the taunt. Do you even know where they are? With two voices in his head, he was overwhelmed. One side of him wanted to desperately cower into the arms of his hallucination whilst the other wanted to blow up and make it everyone's problem. Excuse me? Are you f***ing kidding me? What kinda hero would I be if I didn't even know where dash? And it seemed the latter one. God, do you even hear yourself? Heroes don't act like this, dumbass. Heroes don't act like this, Kachin. It was late in the summer. Quirks had manifested and hope bloomed in the chest of certain youths whilst in others it remained a seedling. Younger Bakugou was honestly tired of Deku, still attempting to pursue his childish dream. It had been 2 years since the diagnosis and yet he was restless, continuing his long mumbling about how he would be number one. Young Bakugou had to put an end to this complex. To this hopeless dream. It was his duty as a hero after all. Stop calling me by that shitty name and say my name properly. Or are you too effing stupid to form coherent nouns? He sent his small leg flying, kicking the freckled boy. And quit acting like a hero. How many times am I going to have to beat that sheet into you? Bakugou turned around, signifying the end of their discussion, but Midoriya continued to address him. Restless, you see. Kanan, I'm not pretending. You're really scaring him. Midoriya gestured to the kid beside him. Right, the one he took the blow for. Bakugou sneered. What's it to you? We were just playing and he volunteered to be the villain dash. Well, why you're acting like a RL villain? His bottom lip trembled when he caught a look at his ex-childhood friend's feral smile. You're acting like more of a villain than him. You're acting like a real D right now. A real FANG villain. He heard the purple-haired student hiss from the other line. Bakugou froze, the silent popping and fizzing of his quirk being subdued. Like a villain, he thought numbly. Images of a pale, tear-stained face coughing out mud projected itself like a slideshow in his mind. Like a villain? Sheet. Behind you. Hell, Bakugou, do you copy? Bakugou? B-dash. I guess you were right all those years ago, Izuku. The last thing he saw was a flash of blue and then the world came to a dizzy stop. Hey, Kachin. It's time to go. Deku? It's time to go. Come back, stay here. Don't leave me. I can't follow you anymore. Follow me one last time. I'll take you anywhere, idiot, I promise. The pause. Anywhere? Deku? Izuku? Midoriya? Midoriya. Bakugou awakened with a strained gasp. Lay back down, mister. A stern voice called from beside him. He hadn't even realized that he had sat up. You got a nasty concussion there from your classmate. Came to take you here as soon as you were hit, so I wouldn't suggest standing up so fast just yet. The tone was meant to be reprimanding, but of course Bakugou saw it as an insultive questioning of his abilities to heal. Because what else would he have seen it as? I'll be fine. Can I leave now? How long have I been here? His head was ringing and he felt a slight pulsing sensation from his skull, but he'd rather leave. Hospital rooms weren't nice when he was alone. The old lady ignored him and just walked over to him with a sad smile, sighing blissfully. You're a lot more peaceful when you're unconscious, mister. Unfortunately for you, I'm not the one expiring soon. She looked taken back at first, before bursting into fits of grainy laughter. He froze, standing still with wide eyes at her reaction before scowling. And it seems like you have a sense of humor too. I wouldn't recommend saying that to other folks. The lady cut her breathy chuckles with a sigh. Sitting beside his bed, she felt his forehead and he flinched. And truth be told, he didn't know why. For once, the blonde remained stunned at this. Leaning into her warmth and unconditional care didn't seem to be an option no matter how much his body urged with need. His brain denied this instruction. And if the woman appeared disheartened, she didn't say much, but the look she sent him f-dash. He hated that look. That look of pity. She coughed slightly. I guess you're fine to go. School ended a few minutes ago, so you should probably ask your friends for no dash. Bakugou quickly interrupted her. I don't do friends. There was a pause. The old lady looked distrustful of his words but seemed to dismiss it. What? Why are you effing looking at me like that? She looked hesitant to speak but decided against it. It's just that, whilst you were unconscious your phone was ringing. A lot. So, I just assumed that dash. He cut her off, rummaging through his blazer aggressively only to find his mobile at the bottom of his school bag. He swiped through the call log and saw a contact name that he was no stranger to. Inko? Inko Midoriya? Bakugou snapped his head towards the old lady's enlightened tone and warm smile. His scowl just deepened. They must be important to you. You were mumbling the name Midoriya? Quite a lot. Thought it was a girlfriend at first. He brushed away her attempt at a conversation and called the number. Come on. Pick up. Pick you. Cat, is that you? Bakugou felt a sigh of relief pass through his parted lips briefly. However, he couldn't ignore the sense that something was gravely wrong. Her tone that gave him déjà vu? Whatever it was, he couldn't place his finger on it. There was a tremor behind her voice and Bakugou attempted to milk the background noise and hear the doctor's words in the background but was unsuccessful. Yeah. Are you alright, Andy? You called plenty of times . It's Izuku . The line went dead. Izuku? Izuku? At first everything was silent, as if he was still processing her words. But the processing never seemed to complete itself as he remained motionless, looking ahead as the grip on his phone loosened ever so slightly. He felt his whole body begin to vibrate, shaking uncontrollably. Bakugou could barely prevent the trembles of his own hands and his phone slipped from his palm, clattering to the ground of the medical room. Suddenly, he wasn't concerned about the hammering between his ribs but rather the way in which the room was closing in ever so slowly. Bakugou-san? Dearie, are you okay ? The old lady's cries of concern were slurred by the white noises and soon were replaced by the inhaled breath Bakugou was holding in. Why couldn't he breathe? Something that came so easy before seemed like a chore. A chore? That wasn't the word for it. Punishment. There. A deserved punishment. Izuku. Tossing his shoes on, he threw his school jacket over his hospital gown before running while the ragged breaths he was releasing seemed to lull him to sleep. When was the last time I slept? Truth be told, Bakugou most likely already knew. Sleeping was already a struggle without Izuku, but without the constant reminder of his heartbeat, the room felt lifeless. Alone. Bakugou continued running, struggling to keep his eyes open. He passed the school gates. The remaining loitering students. Bakugou! He saw a flash of crimson but continued running, until he was no longer in the vision of anyone but the sun. This meant he was free, right? It's Izuku. But when did freedom ever taste so bitter? The tears threatening to spill were burning. It was as if the world was splitting open from its core. Everything was burning. His lungs. His hands. His head. It was at this moment Bakugou hated the world. He was destined to receive a punishment after all. His demise had finally been decided, from the court trials in the shape of white hospital rooms to the doctor's skills being manipulated by karma. When did he start believing in reparation? He had allowed himself to blindly believe the words of those around. First, the praises. Then, the words of second chances. The words of redemption. But he had known all along that he was lying to himself. Izuku, don't. Somewhere along the line of him receiving the news and stumbling out of the room, his phone had found its way back into his hands. He fumbled with his log, begging to the same skies that took his friend, in hopes that they were somehow directing his mother on her way to him. Because he had never felt smaller in his entire life, and suddenly realized he missed being a kid with grubby hands and a shitty quirk. The call went through his voice was cracked and hoarse. Stay where you are, I got Inko's call. I'm coming. Bakugou held onto the street lamp. It wasn't lit. The sun was still in the sky, in fact. But somehow everything still felt gray to him. Bakugou Katsuki is selfish. Bakugou Katsuki is a tyrant. A boy with wheat hair that wreaked havoc as he pleased. He was never meant for gentle words or touches, according to his mother. That's just how things were. It was a fundamental truth. But Bakugou Katsuki also missed the presence of Izuku. And that wasn't a fundamental truth. He missed the spirit that coiled around him, tainted in black, that had a mischievous glint which brightened his appearance. He missed the Izuku that humbled him. The one that tortured him with his tongue and words that were partially true. Bakugou Katsuki was a mess. Please stop sulking, we're arriving soon, brat. He didn't complain. His mother had collected him from under the sun's watchful glare with a matching frown. "We're going to have a talk about your priorities, dumbass." His mother held a slight smirk as she altered the car mirror towards her son. It was clear that this was her way of trying to smooth over the current situation. And his rolling of the eyes paused when he focused onto his lap and saw the gown, realizing that he had left half of his belongings behind in his haste. Bakugou grunted, hiding his growing blush by turning his attention to the window. "Shut up and drive, old hag." She let out a hefty laugh, even throwing her head back as she swiveled the steering wheel aggressively. "I said shut the F up and drive, not start laughing hysterically and crash the car, you effing maniac." Bakugou screeched as he was thrown into the car door. "Sorry." For the first time in a long time, his mother looked at peace with herself as she turned around to face him. She never apologized. That too was a fundamental truth. "It's just that you seem a lot more like yourself now. I missed you, brat." Bakugou Katsuki didn't miss things. "Just get to FNG driving, woman." She snorted, mumbling under her breath. "Old hag? It's been a while." The drive wasn't eventful, but it allowed the blonde to recover slightly, but it all proved futile the moment his mother parked the car. Luckily, she hadn't swerved and crashed, but that was asking for the bare minimum. "Time to get out, brat." "Mum, what if I couldn't dash?" "What the F are you stuttering about? Get out of my DMN car." "And we're back to Mum, really?" He was quickly met by his mother on his side, who pulled him from his depressive stupor as motherly as she could. "I was expecting a different reaction, kiddo." How could she act as if he wasn't? Bakugou couldn't bring himself to say those 4 letters. The chill they brought upon his whole body resembled one of a child from a glacier, naked. It was uncontrollable and a natural way to protect him, though Bakugou was certain it did more harm than good. His mother was in no way a stereotypical mother, passive in whatever she did. She certainly wasn't old-fashioned with her abrasive and stark personality, but even she could freeze up in the face of death. Right? He passed the smiling receptionist, followed by the guard who usually threw him out by the evening. All held smiling faces, giddy almost. But Bakugou felt sick. How could they carry on with their day whilst one stopped? They were sick. They were at Izuku's door in a matter of minutes, gathering any excess emotion. Bakugou couldn't bring himself to look up. He had visited this room countless times, filled each corner with his fingerprints, spent hours with his mind racing as he sat in the very chair positioned next to the injured boy, and yet he couldn't bear to look up and see the empty hospital room. The room that surely held a weeping mother with a folded duvet and a matching pillow set. Cat. His head snapped up at the familiar nickname holding such eagerness. "Hey, Auntie." She engulfed him in a hug, blocking his field of vision but filling his senses with warmth and cinnamon. Bakugou allowed himself to melt into her touch. "I'm so sorry, Auntie." He had found himself hiccuping. The slow and fluctuating way she patted his back implied that she was confused about his apology, but she didn't push on. He didn't think she could understand. He didn't want her to understand. He had been cruel, tagging along with her mourning when he was also partially to blame for it. All the scars and burns she had to encounter. Gatherings of middle schoolers bawling with culpability. Files and reports sent to Aldra Middle School. All of this done, and yet, she still gingerly lifted his chin with her index finger, innocently guiding him to have a clearer view of the room. The windows were opened with the sound of chirping being a nice replacement for grainy, white noise. "Mum? Who's there?" That could only mean Izuku. The name was punched out of his throat like a breath of fresh air. Bakugou felt light, mouth filled with cotton and empty-headed. Slowly, he fell to his knees, unable to make it to the side of the bed. "He's awake. He's awake, you're awake." "Izuku? How does he know my name, Mum?" The freckled boy snapped his head to his mother. A look of worry washed over his features. "Mum? Who is he?" Midoriya, age 15, had attempted suicide by falling off a school building, only to wake up from his coma a year later. The catch? He had amnesia. Retrograde amnesia. He had no recollection of the previous haunting and brutish memories of his past, and Bakugou's stomach guiltily churned with pleasure. This meant all the pain he suffered and endured in middle school was simply erased. They had vanished, as if the wind decided to be a saving grace and steal his shed tears from him. However, Bakugou's content was short-lived when the doctor casually reminded them as to why Midoriya was even admitted into the hospital. They couldn't dance around the topic. They would have to talk about the bullying. Midoriya would have to relive his treatment again. Is it FING temporary, at least? Bakugou was met by a smack on the head. Watch your mouth around people, brat. He scowled but still looked at the doctor expectedly. Well, technically we can't be certain until the scans come through and Then he spit it out, then. He scoffed. Suddenly, he felt a kick to his shin and turned to glare at his mother, who was intensely glaring at him when he also caught a glimpse of Inko nervously chewing her bottom lips, causing him to grunt out a small apology. Sorry. The doctor then threw him a small smile as she rearranged her files. It's fine. Understandable to react as such, after everything you've been through. We are trying our hardest though, so do try to be patient with us. But what I can tell you so far is that it was probably induced as a psychological protection from the bullying he faced, meaning that he has created a mental blockade. Reminding him will most likely hinder the process or worst-case scenario leave longer psychological effects. In any case, I'd leave the decision up to him. They didn't need to remind him? They didn't need to remind him. Bakugou allowed himself to be selfish for once, and as soon as he did, he quickly found himself frowning. He knew that this wasn't the first, nor would it be the last time, and it felt like he was cheating. Being weak. Opting for the easier path, the path cowards walked. So we just let him regain his memories by himself? Is that it? Inko looked up, eyes brimming, and it appeared as if she had much more to say but opted to gnaw her lips. The action rooted both blondes and they looked down simultaneously. She did the same. Wouldn't that just prolong his return to normality? I'm afraid so, Mum. Would you recommend a therapist or anything that could SDMLT a reaction that'll return his memory? She sounded distraught, downright broken. And he couldn't do anything more than continue glaring at the floor whilst she frantically continued fixing his mess. Some type of hero he was. That's entirely up to you. The clock on the wall moved for a long time before Inko sighed as she dusted herself and decided to finally stand up. The woman put her hand out with a whisper of a tired smile on her face. Thank you. Thank you for everything. The doctors then drew back and led them all out of the room into the beginning of a cruel yet beautiful fate. Bakugou returned to school a few days later. He had been given permission to miss school for a few days, an advice given by his therapist. He only took it up because that meant he could spend more time with Midoriya, but somehow he never found himself at the hospital door of the latter, too afraid that he'd finally regain his memories and confront him and his weak pleasantries. So, days passed and he never grew the courage to interact with the freckled boy and instead remained in his bedroom with gnawed nails. According to Inko, his idea would have been a bust as Midoriya spent most of his days asleep, anyways. What do you want, eyebags? Bakugou had adjusted to the wary glances he was receiving from his classmates. It was nothing he wasn't used to, even though their whispers scratched the back of his neck like recently sharpened pins. But there was one thing that he couldn't seem to ignore. It actually scratched that. He couldn't stand the brutal stare of eyebags. It was annoyingly calculated. Shinso scoffed unimpressed. I'm eyebags? Have you checked yourself recently? Then he paused and glossed over Bakugou's features. Actually, my bad. They aren't as bad as before. Shut up and answer the question. Not until I get a better nickname. Bakugou threw him a deadpan expression. Was this fucker serious? He gave him a quick once-over before continuing. How about Einstein? Shinso scrunched up his nose. You can't afford to be picky here, princess. He snarled. Fine. Eyebags it is. They fell silent until Shinso spoke up. You know, I'm sorry if I said something hurtful back then. When? The hero and villain training. He pursed his lips, and that's when Bakugou was reminded of the training. It brought a strange itch to his chest. He had lost, theoretically speaking, defeated if he wanted to be brutally honest, but it didn't feel as such. But perhaps the endorphins from the hospital trip were still lingering in his system. He just hoped they weren't being assessed on the exercise. I called you a villain and everything. I know what that feels like and I wanted to know if I overstepped any boundaries. It's fine. I was being an a-hole anyway. He waved him off, eager to continue reading and distract himself from the school day ahead. Silence filled their conversation and the class, itself, seemed to have quietened down as well. He barked at the timid atmosphere. What? You don't really seem like the type to apologize, that's all. Ha! Bakugou sat up straighter to level with the latter. What's that supposed to mean? But he shrugged, a small smile playing on his face, and just turned around, walking back to his seat. Hey! Get back here you fucker. What a colorful welcome, Bakugou. He snapped his head to find Aizawa drawing out the response, perched by the door with a lazy expression. He made his way to the podium and gave him a pointed look. If you sit down then we'll be able to make a start. After that school went on like a blur. And the blonde would never allow himself to admit it out loud, but he was quite giddy. He didn't usually get giddy at anything, but the prospect of visiting Izuku after school was what had kept his mood heightened throughout the day. That's why when he sat across from the boy in the quiet evening, he didn't know what he felt. His stomach was doing flips, but he strongly doubted it was out of glee, though he suspected that maybe some aspects of joy regarding the possibility of talking to the boy might be the cause of it. His fingers hovered above the hands of the other. He wanted to feel his body radiate heat. It must be different than holding cold hands. Hey! As far as first words came, Bakugou knew these were the most underwhelming. He hadn't known how or where to start. He couldn't scold and he couldn't jeer. He couldn't be himself just yet. And he was fine with waiting if it meant the boy could mail a full recovery. The boy in question turned his face away from the window and towards him. Hi, again. Midoriya gave a tired smile and wave, but the room fell silent very fast. His voice was soft, but not willing, and it scratched a particular itch in his brain. The blonde could tell how much energy it sked dry. Why you're the one FF from a few days ago, right? Cough, Katsuki? Katsuki? Yeah. Then Midoriya paused. Well, that's what my cough called you anyways. It didn't sound like a nickname, so it's most likely your birth name because of how quickly you reacted to it. Plus, she seems awfully close to Bakugou let out a scoff. At least you didn't lose your effing mumbling, I guess. The cursing must have been a surprise to the latter as he quickly stumbled over his words, face flushing with the color pink. Bakugou thought it was a lovely shade. Looked nice on the nerd. Emphasized his dumb freckles. They were everywhere. Sorry. Mom says I used to get carried away sometimes. Well, Auntie is right. So listen to your mother more often. He coughed, finally deciding to stuff his hands in his pockets. Maybe another day. The name is Katsuki, but you used to call me Kachin Soda. Yeah, it sounded real fing weird when you called me my first name, that's all. Both boys awkwardly shuffled in their seats at the use of the past tense. It was only silent for a brief minute before Midoriya broke it. His voice was scratched as if he were parched. It differed greatly from his usual bubbly mummers. Are you okay? Ha! Then more quietly. What the F are you talking about? Again he flinched. Nothing. It's just that when you came to visit the other day you were in a gown similar to this. Carefully, he lifted his gown and it fluttered between his fingers. Were you hurt too? Nothing ever changes, does it? He scoffed, unbelievingly. Midoriya tilted his face to the side, motioning for the blonde to carry on speaking. You're just the same as always. Worrying about others when you're, he felt inclined to pause as if testing the word. Hurt. See, can I ask you something, Kachin? The blonde barely restrained the flinch caused by the nickname. He only hummed in acknowledgement after some time. How was past me? The one before I got admitted here. He waited for the latter to finish yawning before answering. Has he always looked so dreary and tired? Nice. Nice like the smell of a new book or the nice feeling you get when your feet skirt the water surface and finally dip within the cool blue embers of the sea. Nice like the last stuttering steps an athlete takes as they cross the finish line. He was just nice. Midoriya seemed to ignite a welcoming presence of finality and freedom. It was like a much-needed gulp of air. But unfortunately his judgment was clouded, and so he also brought a sense of reality. His voice used to resonate in Bakugou's mind with such annoyance, but now it was a source of perseverance and a reminder of his ability to improve. There were so many things he wanted to say, but as he watched the boy's eyes flutter shut, he decided against it. Yeah, nice. The next day Midoriya was out of commission. During the night something had occurred and no visitors were allowed. That, of course, included Katsuki. And for once, he allowed himself to miss the smell of anesthesia. The following few days were calm before the storm. Bakugou knew something was brewing, something he had yet to come to terms with, making everything eerily calm. They had no way of knowing if Midoriya's body would work against itself again, and the boy always seemed tired. The blonde knew that at this rate he would never truly have a chance if he didn't at least try to communicate. That's when the system was created. Ask away. Midoriya was pensive, his face scrunched in concentration as he tapped his chin. His eye bags seemed to have grown between now and the last visit, even his freckles seemed dimmer. Food. And when the blonde curled his eyebrows, he let out a quick, short breath response. FF favorite FO food? Lame. The system was simple. Midoriya would ask a question a day and Bakugou had to respond. It had been Inko's idea when she had noticed Bakugou's dismay at not seeing the boy the day before. How about you allow him to ask you a question and you have to answer it? She had said. About what? Anything or nothing at all. Don't you want to catch up with him, Cat? It's been nearly a year. It had been a year lost in Izuku's life and Bakugou should have no say in this at all, but this was his mess. He had created this beast and it was looming over him with monstrous height. Regret, desperation, and grief were all pending emotions, of course, but somehow he allowed himself to indulge in hope. I guess you're right. I usually am. Then she paused. But remember, baby steps. And so now he sat down before the ladder, hands awkwardly stationed beside him as he looked at the young boy's sulk. I'll let you off since it's your first question. Anything spicy, to be honest. That's not specific enough, Keikachin. He pouted, arms crossed as much as he could get them. It was a weak motion but it still made the blonde's lips curl. Kachin. The name reverberated against his skull. Although the boy had created the godforsaken nickname, it sounded so foreign to both of them. Especially as it slipped his quivering lips. Despite that he replied nonchalantly. SEK2. Also, didn't you want to ask a question about your FING self? The boy quietly shook his head and Bakugou grunted softly, slowly finding himself disliking the boy before him. He didn't like the fragile and frail boy that was displayed to him, in the form of a sprawled doll on a hospital bed. Bakugou missed how headstrong the latter had been, able to level with Bakugou when needed. Because, despite being the target of bullying, he never actively stopped pursuing his ambitions, but, of course, it had been Bakugou to change all of that. And now he no longer resembled Deku. He was no longer nice. You also don't have to call me that, you know, he added after a while. I don't have a cute nickname to give you back and dash. I want to. Midoriya whispered, hands now off his chest and being wrung in his lap. It means a lot to you, so that means it must have meant a lot to me too. It was silent once more. Why was he even trying? Midoriya was sure to get his memories back and he would know. Everyone would know. Auntie. Old hag. Right now, Bakugou was hiding behind his fear of being found out, so much so that he hadn't been able to live these past few months. So, why was he even trying? Can I ask you another question? Keikachin? Midoriya was awake. He was awake and kicking. But he didn't kick like he used to. And he didn't grin as he used to. And Bakugou loathed that it was him that drove him to his death because that Deku no longer existed. Not until the imposter on his hospital bed regained his memories. It's late, you should go to sleep. He pushed himself out of the chair heading for the door. Good night. Kadash, Midoriya reached out, hands stretching but being stopped by the tubes he was attached with. Stupid tubes dash. Bakugou didn't hear the end as he quickly closed the door, realizing that old habits didn't die. Because, again, he found himself pushing the freckled boy away instead of confronting emotions. Know why Izuku has been pouting all morning? Inko had asked him the next day and Bakugou replied with a sluggish shrug. That's weird because if I recall correctly, you were the last one to speak to him last night. Weird indeed. He muttered. Cat. Have you asked the old hag yet? Bakugou interrupted, moving his hands into his pocket to retrieve spare coins. They stood beside a coffee vending machine. It was the afternoon and the two of them were allowing themselves to be pampered by the dull taste of caffeine. Bakugou had been introduced to it 6 months into Midoriya's slumber and hadn't been able to rid his desire to drink it every so often. Maybe he took one look at her and it ruined his morning. I can vouch for him. Katsuki. She hissed playfully, pinching his ear. Why do you always insist on insulting your mother? She doesn't exactly make it hard to do so, you know? There was a scoff beside him as his cup slowly filled up with miscellaneous brown liquid. Beyond. How long do you think it'll take him to remember everything? I don't know. If it's a psychological barricade then maybe never. She let out a breath of hot air and he quickly regretted his decision, casting a sideways glance to see her brush a tear from the crook of her chin splattered with freckles. Inko shook her head dismissively and he looked back at his cup. That doesn't mean we can't make new memories with him, though. Bakugou shrugged and just simply picked up his cup. I guess so. She was still beside him and he felt her tense. Is that why he's upset? Oh, my poor baby. No. It's not that exactly. The blonde cringed at his indecisiveness. It was so unlike him. I kinda don't like. Well, wanted to speak to him? What? Now, she was facing him, her expression, a mixture between livid and confused. What's with the change of attitude, Katsuki? Katsuki? F-I-N-G ouch. Perhaps his choice of words were wrong. Not in a mean way. It's just that he's different. All of a sudden her eyebrows crumpled against one another, and her eyes widened with grief. Because he lost his memory, jumping from a building. Different doesn't mean bad. Do you know what bad would be though, Cat? Fiddish. Her haggard breath echoed in the empty hospital hallway and she froze upon hearing her hostile voice, slumping into a nearby chair. Quickly burying her face in her clammy hands, she sighed. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have raised my voice like that. Her throat appeared clogged as she spoke with thick regret. He'd never been on the receiving end of an apology. Never felt as if he were owed one with all the damage he caused. The blonde's hands flew in front of him as he shook his head awkwardly. It's okay, Auntie. You don't have to apologize. But I do. Because, I understand where you're coming fro. She let out a choked breath that resembled a sob, before continuing. I've been so confused recently and I feel so out of control. Izuku is back, isn't he? And yet, nothing is going right, no matter how much I try and... Inko shook her head frantically, pushing herself up and away from the blonde's grip. Bakugou didn't know when he had wrapped his arms around her shivering form. I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me. I shouldn't be burdening you with this. She then approached him slowly. Bakugou was used to this weary behavior, being seen as a ticking time bomb, explosive. So, he tensed at the sight of her arms open to him instead of the usual withdrawn expression adults gave him. He allowed himself to be enclosed in her motherly comfort for a brief second before pulling away to face her tear-stricken expression. It was too much and he let go, looking to the floor. He'll be all right. But it felt as if he was just trying to comfort himself. Bakugou clenched his fists. Please be okay. Please come back. Amich. She sighed, cradling the blonde's face gently. Because he has us, doesn't he? Let's not give up on him, Cat. We can't lose him again. What if we already have? He'd never feared something more. Finally, they made their way to Midoriya's chamber. They had been expected there for quite some time but had obviously been occupied with confronting emotions rather than tardiness. Still, they were greeted with the usual smile and green curls. You're back. And Bakugou gave him a nod of affirmation as a response. He threw a flickering glance at the woman but Inko remained perched by the door frame, waving him off as if she were dropping a kid to school. Sorry for yesterday. Silence. What? Why is he looking at me with those dumb doe eyes? Stupid nice doe eyes. Stupid. Nothing. You just don't seem like the type to apologize. Despite it being the second time it had been told to him, it felt different. He scoffed, making his way closer to the bed, chair in hand. You're still a little punk, I see. A ghost of a smile took over Midoriya's face. Really? Don't take that as a compliment. That day seemed to have sparked something in Midoriya as soon after, a few weeks later in fact, Bakugou stumbled into the beginning of the end. Did we play together as kids? That was the very first thing the young boy had asked him as he stepped into his room the next week. The boy spoke with such clarity compared to his first few days. And despite it being a question, he hadn't done anything extraordinary. Bakugou's heart rate sped up. I mean, it's a fuck given. And this caused the young boy to fiddle with the wires and tubes hanging around him. I had a dream yesterday night and well, it felt so surreal. It was the afternoon and it was so hot outside, my skin was tingling and everything. Then he trailed off near the end as both of their eyes met. And you were there. Nervously, Midoriya swiped his tongue over his bottom lip before continuing. They were the most susceptible to being chapped. Anyways, did we? Play as kids, I mean. It was vague but somehow the message was clear. Bakugou nodded dumbly as he sat beside the boy starstruck. Is he Dash? Can you describe the dream any clearer, nerd? He had tried to be soft but the young boy still flinched at his harsh words. It's nothing really, Dash. No, it's not. We did used to play together when we were kids. Known each other since childhood. He muttered. And the boy's features relaxed, mouth parting to make an O shape. Well, we were at a playground. Beside the sandpit and I was crying. He snorted at the reminiscence. But you weren't. You were in front of me, forming this type of barrier and shouting at the people in front of me. It was quite the show. Bakugou finally found it in himself to look up and face Midoriya's lopsided smile. I bet it was. He finally stood up, hands making contact with the mop of forest green hair, ruffling it. Look at you go, remembering sheet. The boy winced, slapping his hands away with a pout. Be careful of the bee bandages. A ghost of a smile lingered on his own face as he said those words, and the fears of the past no longer felt like a restraint to him. Bakugou hadn't understood why Midoriya's previous recollection of him had brought him such joy. After all, he'd wished to remain independent from his past, and he couldn't do that if the latter remembered him. But parts of the blonde wondered if he did genuinely wish for the boy to forget parts of him. Without his past, was Bakugou Katsuki truly himself? Everything up till now had been crucial in the construction of his character, so perhaps he feared that forgetting his past memories of Bakugou would cause the boy to never truly know him? Things felt messy after a while. He was a mess of emotion, each thought and opinion vibrating within his skull with immense strength. But still, somehow, every day he'd put himself through the same torture of visiting and he'd continue to repress his concerns. It had been a quiet month of visiting in and out, the boys still acting like strangers to one another. Maybe that's another reason why the blonde hated the removal of the past so much. Nevertheless, the quiet snacking on the cut slices of oranges was interrupted by Midoriya, whose expression had been pensive for a few minutes. We went mountain climbing as kids, didn't we? Bakugou sat closer to the boy than he had in the past few days. Their legs were somewhat tangled even though Midoriya's were under his bleak covers. I saw it yesterday. In your dreams, right? Bakugou found himself speaking a lot more softly around the boy nowadays, his tone minimized to allow Midoriya's eyes to shine without fear. And it worked as the boy hummed and nodded at ease. It was exceptionally snowy that day. And all I could see was white, but somehow I could still see you. The blonde found himself reminiscing the rosy cheeks of the latter and his excited chatter as he trailed behind younger him. It was a sort of tradition, you could say, between our families. But you were such a FAVP though, afraid of heights or something. The first time we did it I had to carry you. This earned him a snort. An overwhelming amount of confidence surged within the hospitalized boy. You mean, little Kachin carrying me? Bakugou scowled. What? You don't think I could carry you? He rolled up his sleeves and flexed his upper arms. These are the arms of a future hero, nerd. The freckled face pursed its lips, unconvinced but extremely amused. For once, the blonde found himself moving before thinking, hooking his arms under both Midoriya's thighs and back to lift him up. A fluttery laugh left the latter's lips as words of protest spilled out. You see this? Needless to say, he got told off. But he couldn't find it in himself to regret it. He would do it all over again to hear the joyous sounds of the younger. Of course, innocence never lasted for too long. How did I celebrate my birthday last year, by the way? The question threw him off guard. Bakugou hadn't expected it after seeing Midoriya's progress in the past few weeks. It had been positioned at such a weird hour of the day too. They were sitting on the bed, hands barely touching but thighs pressed onto one another. The blonde raised a thick and exquisitely crafted eyebrow at Midoriya, the television light barely illuminating his features. Midoriya was still facing the screen as he spoke. What's up with the question, nerd? Kinda random, isn't it? His hands were warming up, sweat forming, and Bakugou knew that was never a good sign. He quickly paused the series. And didn't you, G? But Bakugou was cut off by a meek head movement. Midoriya was shaking his head, a strand of green hair cupped his face. Not exactly. Kachin. He squeaked, face flushed red. That's not how it works. I don't get a memory every time I close my eyes. Sometimes it's just dark. There was a weird silence that hung in the room after that. Midoriya must have sensed it also as he spoke up, once again. That's not what I meant to say, anyway. I just realized that don't remember how I spent my birthdays. And I want to know. I want more happy memo dash. That's normal, you've got FING amnesia. Yeah, but dash. No FNG buts, you hear me? Now move your butt over, we're watching One Piece, aren't we? That means we've got a long way to go, shitty nerd. Don't ruin it with weird questions. And anyways, your marathon skills could use a lot of polishing. It was silent and Bakugou almost thought that he had lost the battle when a quiet mumble escaped the latter's lips. Fine, Kachin. He knew that he had evaded the question, but time was scarce. Sooner or later, it'd be revealed why he had no memories of it. The unopened invitations, the tears, the popped balloons. Sooner or later he would have to repent. Do you still visit the log? Near Bakugou Agency? He flickered a smug grin in the direction of the young boy, whose eyes were wide in curiosity. No, I nearly forgot it existed. Maybe we can go there one of these days or whatever. Your choice, nerd. There was a quiet exhale before Midoriya nodded giddily. I'd like that. Bakugou knew he was difficult. Difficult to take in. Difficult to tame. And definitely difficult to love. But somehow, Midoriya was able to deal with all of these things with such ease that the blonde wondered whether it truly was difficult to do. They had finally fallen into a comfortable pattern. One they both liked. Bakugou would visit as much as his busy schedule allowed him to, and when he did, Midoriya would always welcome him with a dream he had the night before. Each dream was recounting a childhood memory they both had. As comforting as this was, it still terrified Bakugou. He didn't want the past to catch up to him anymore, but at the same time, he couldn't allow this feeling to envelop him for too long. Everyone else around him was overjoyed. Inko had cried for hours at the realization that his memories were coming back, even if they were small chunks. And the tear-stained shirt he had that day was a painful reminder. He hated admitting it, but even his old hag had shed a tear. But today he had different worries. The day had been difficult. The USJ had been attacked, and the aftermath slimmed the possibility of the blonde meeting the freckled boy in the evening. His reason for fighting, his harsh treatment towards the villain, ignoring the fact that they were villains staging an attack on a group of high school kids, was because he had been expecting to make it to the hospital in time, but it all proved futile as they were ushered into another hall to be examined. They were seated down in the hall whilst waiting to be called for checkups one by one. The waiting hall was like any Japanese gymnasium, if you ignored the fact that the room was filled to the brim with police officers and doctors. The authorities had already taken his statements when he began to be uncooperative. And, despite his tantrums and curse-string sentences, the teacher's decision didn't wither. They were to stay until every area of the school had been examined and investigated, including non-hero students. And that in itself could take hours. A frown caused his eyebrows to scrunch in distaste, and Bakugou opened his mouth ready to throw yet another insult, in vain, when a hand clamped itself to his shoulder. "Sensei, no disrespect but..." Usually when someone starts with those words, they're going to be disrespectful. But the red-haired student waved off any concern with an awkward chuckle. "Well, we're all fine. A bit shaken up, but fine. I'm sure our parents are worried about us, and keeping us here for hours on end isn't going to track down the villains, especially since they're after All Might." Bakugou immediately recognized the voice. "So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, please let us go." Aizawa narrowed his eyes as he inspected the two, his eyes lingering over the hand the student had placed on the blonde's shoulder longer than needed before he sighed. "Sir. Since you said it a lot nicer than Bakugou over here," and the blonde simply grunted, refusing to recount the amount of curses he had thrown at their teacher. "I'll let you go. But make sure your parents are..." The words were now being directed towards the vast majority of the class instead of only them. And so, Bakugou quickly blurred out the man's drawing tone as his eyes flickered to the red hair, finding himself liking the color red for once. His face had miscellaneous smudges and was littered with small crumbs debris, but yet he still glowed. "Bakugou, right? What's it to you?" More awkward laughter ensued. "Nothing really, I just wanted to say thank you for back there. We worked pretty well together, huh?" When the villains had initially infiltrated their training ground, the red-haired student and him leapt into action simultaneously, though they hadn't faced as many repercussions as he thought they would have. "I guess so, fuckface." Bakugou stilled, thinking he had overstepped his boundaries again, but when he turned back the student was smiling at him. It was a broad and bashful smile. "Ijiro Kirishima. That's my name, actually." His hands were outstretched as if he too was expecting an introduction from Bakugou. But Bakugou simply huffed, visually unbothered. "Fuckface suits you just fine." And without a beat, he spun around, refusing to acknowledge the small curling of his lips until he was seated in his car, and that curl of the lips only got wider, by a fraction, when he noticed Midoriya's eyes lighting up at his presence. "Didn't think you'd make it tonight?" When Bakugou parted his lips in defense, he let out a small laugh. "I saw the news. They attacked UA. That's your school, right? That's a big hero school, huh?" He nodded weakly, awkwardly squirming in his hero suit. He had blasted out of the hall as soon as he had been given permission. His mother was already waiting for him outside the school gates patiently. "Again. What's up with your priorities, brat?" She had made sure to chew him before allowing him to meet the ladder. And Bakugou still didn't know how he managed to turn into putty at the young boy's hands every single time. He was merciless and hard to endure half of the time, right until he was met by that pair of green eyes. The very same pair he saw were wide and red after the fall. Carefully, Midoriya scooched closer to the side of his bed and inched towards the blonde with his hands outstretched. He must have noticed the change in atmosphere as he groped the air, motioning for the blonde and causing him to begrudgingly shift towards him. The freckled boy's fingers found themselves curling around the explosive decoration, clipped onto his unruly blonde hair. "I was going to ask you something before, but..." He paused, carefully eyeing Bakugou as if he had already undressed all his insecurities. "I think it can wait another day." Today, Bakugou would like to believe that he saved his classmates. Well, the ones he could. Apart from Frogface, there had been no major injuries. She had to face the villain's quirk head-on. It was unavoidable. But still, his homeroom teacher had taken the most damage, head bloodied after being repeatedly slammed to the ground. And Bakugou couldn't save him, nor his classmate. He hadn't saved anyone. Not Midoriya. No one. He knew that it was unavoidable, but that didn't mean it hurt any less. If only overcoming emotions was as easy as defeating villains. They remained silent for a little longer, Midoriya continuing the action of running his hand through his hair and Bakugou letting him, surprisingly. That was until the latter spoke up again. "Our favorite hero is still All Might, right?" Scoff. "Stupid nerd, you forgot about All Might too?" He let out a weak laugh before hiding his face into his arms. "Yeah, I guess so." More silence. "You know, you remind me of him sometimes." "Who?" And when Midoriya gave him a pointed look, He squinted. All might? No effing way, I'm way better. I'm sure you are. He giggled, then stopped to chew his lips as if contemplating whether or not to say the next few words. It's just that you're always there when I need you. Like right now, you came all this way for me despite the fact that you could be at home resting after the attack. Maybe I'm overreacting and it's not all for me, but still it's a nice gesture. A larger smiler was placated onto his face now. You're like my very own hero, Kachin. Bakugou knew he was difficult to like, but somehow Midoriya made it seem so easy. The weather improved, but still they don't leave the comfort of the hospital room. I want to leave, Mum. He whined for what felt like the millionth time, and if he wasn't already in a hospital bed, Bakugou would have put him in there himself. If you open your pretty lips one more time, I swear to God, I'll slam your he. Her swift reply stopped his train of definitely not kind thoughts. I know, sweetie. It was quiet for another second before the groaning started once more. Are you sure that I can't even step out, Dash? The time of the USJ was now long gone, and despite the critiques UA was receiving from external reporters, the attack appeared non-existent. Classes began once again, and the blonde let it slip his mind, instead choosing to pay attention to more important things. Bakugou sighed before barking out a complaint, sick of the pouting boy in front of him. Auntie. She simply hummed, but he took it as an invitation to continue. Why can't the nerd go out anyways? Then she stilled, her slouch now clearly visible as she paused mid-action. This caused Bakugou's eyebrows to crease and Midoriya's eyes to widen before dropping to his lap. But it only took a few seconds until she continued fluttering around Midoriya once again. I thought you out of all people would know why, Cat. Did she know? Know what? His voice suddenly felt dry, as if sandpaper had replaced his esophagus, and this sudden change in attitude made the woman spin around to face him, her eyebrows raised. About his injuries. But Bakugou just blinked. His legs, Bakugou. They're damaged because of the dash. Her eyes flickered to Midoriya knowingly before she looked back at the blonde. I thought that since you're here the most you'd have noticed that he can't leave his bed by himself, Dash. Since when? Since he woke up. She sighed. It appeared that his reaction had now confused her. Cat? Seriously? Memories of nurses ushering the blonde out while hovering around the hospitalized boy started to plague his mind. Were they preparing him for a shower? It could have been for anything for all Bakugou knew. After all, he had been unaware of the fact that he had paralyzed someone till 11 months later. Still better than murder. I didn't know. Silence. It's fine. S not. Is Dash. He paused, eyes straining on the still legs hidden by layers of duvets. Is there a chance of recovery? Another round of silence. There is, thank God. His body has been repairing ever since he was in a coma with the help of the doctors. He's been under physiotherapy for 8 months now. His treatment actually started whilst he was in the coma. A pause as she took a shaky breath in. He took a lot more impact on his upper half rather than his lower half, anyways. Also, it's funny that you're asking about this now because he's actually been scheduled to have physiotherapy. Oh. This didn't stop the woman's excited ramble as she talked about the exercises he would have to complete while reassuring her son that he would be walking in no time. But Bakugou felt his heart clench. This woman had already seen her son's first steps, and now she had to revisit this time of her life again. He was slowing them down. He was forcing others to stay in the past whilst he progressed. Bakugou's gaze settled on Inko ruffling the green nest, and he swiftly looked away. It was too domestic for him. He didn't deserve to look at it. His fingers rammed against his desk rhythmically as the cupboard remained in his peripheral view. He would leave it closed for today. The very next week, the blonde knocked on his door, folded wheelchair in hand. Hey! Midoriya's eyes snapped towards his ruby ones. The book he was holding quickly abandoned as he started scrambling towards the edge of the bed. It was just an awkward bundle of limbs since the boy had little control over his nerves and coordination. Oh, am I going Dash? But he was stopped by a slight push. Bakugou had shoved him back into his covers, with a grim expression. Stay put. You're not meant to be straining your legs, dumbass. Did you even get permission? Midoriya narrowed his eyes, as if he would reject Bakugou's offer whether that was the case. The freckled boy had his arms warped around himself protectively as he pouted, and the blonde sighed, crouching beside his bedside as he laid out the chair. "Yeah, I did." He then flicked his forehead. "Dumbass." "Oh. Yeah, oh." They fell into a silent state, Bakugou silently reassembling the wheelchair and Midoriya shuffling around, his fingers tightly wrapping around his bed cover. Kachin?" The blonde let out a hum, still crouching as he attempted to pry the wheels open. "Yeah, nerd. Thank you. For everything, that is." "Don't thank me." "Oh. Can I ask why?" He looked up and met a pair of emerald eyes. They were bright and full of light. "Long story. Not enough time." Bakugou downcast his gaze, once again, allowing his blonde hair to flutter back down and cover his pained expression. "Well, can you at least tell me where we're going?" "Huh? Who says we're even going anywhere?" Midoriya blinked, lips pursed. "You bought a wheelchair over. And usually, visitors bring wheelchairs to carry said person around." He then gestured to himself. "Unless, this was just for decorations dash." "Shut it, smartass. That doesn't answer my question, Kachin." He was unperturbed by the snark he received and instead attempted to clamber the seat once more. "Where are you taking me, dash?" Midoriya's wiggling was interrupted by Bakugou swatting him. "I'll tell you when you stop trying to get into that FING seat by yourself. If you want to break your legs even more, be my FNG guest, but just remember the doctors told you that you're not allowed to dash." "Strain my legs." Yeah. A frown found its way onto Midoriya's feature, eyebrows furrowed as he looked ahead. The blonde repressed the urge to massage the frown into a more characteristic expression. Upon noticing how deep in thought the boy was, Bakugou sighed as he tried to be as comforting as his nature would allow him to be. "Doctor's order, nerd." "I know," he pouted. "But it's not fair. I want to go out like before." The blonde snorted. "You don't even remember before. Why would you want to go back to that shithole, dash?" Realizing his mistake, he froze, but the freckled boy didn't seem harmed by the harsh choice of words. In fact, Midoriya seemed to be in a daze, eyes still bright with piqued interest. "That's true. But I have you to fill me in on what I've missed, right, Kachin? And plus, with the way things are right now, I don't see how my life before could have a dash. Garden." "Kachin, what are you talking of, dash? We're going to the hospital's garden, idiot." Despite the insult, he still slipped a hand around the latter's waist as he deposited him into the chair. "So, shut up and get ready." And a smile quickly split open the younger's face, before he began vibrating in his seat. They made their way through the empty hallway quite quickly. The door leading to the garden was wide open and Midoriya could barely see the scraps of green, the littered debris of flower petals. It had been a long time since he had a waft of the fresh spring air, or felt the afternoon buzz. "I think I'll practice my walking even more now." "Will you now?" "Yeah. And then, one of these days I'll be walking alongside you, Kachin." He sighed, almost dreamily. "Side by side, just like how we pictured it when we were younger." Bakugou paused. "You better keep that FING promise." "I will." Weeks passed, nearly months. Every day had been a pleasant encounter, that was until it wasn't. It was to be expected. Nothing ever seemed to last with Bakugou around. 5 weeks. That's how long the freckled boy had been awake. And it took him 5 weeks to regain memories from the ripe age of ironic, huh? "My friends," Midoriya blurted out randomly. The room was quiet as the boy fiddled with his fingers. They were cocooned in his hospital room, watching from the window as people came in and out of the hospital. The day had been underwhelming, with a lack of activities to actually do. There weren't a lot of 2-player games available, after all. Bakugou's eyebrow rose slightly as he repeated his words, but slower. "If friends." But the way he had spoken made it sound like a foreign concept. Midoriya frowned. "Yeah. The people we hung around with when we were little. More than the 2 of us. Where are they?" When Bakugou didn't reply, he went off on a tangent as per usual. "I wanted to ask you about this before, but I didn't know how to bring it up." "Yeah. It's really awkward because I didn't want to ask you in case it upset you somehow. You get me? Like if you wanted us to meet all together, you would have, but you haven't. And I know that they teased me a lot when we were younger and everything, but we were still close, right? It's just how kids are, but they haven't visited yet and Mum doesn't want to tell me anything and dash. Teasing doesn't even begin to touch the surface of what we did to you. Bakugou didn't realize that the boy had stopped speaking and was instead quietly looking straight at him with a conflicted expression, until he sighed. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how are they doing? The smile he gave Bakugou was weak and forced, but luckily the blonde saw through it. Those assholes haven't visited you and you want to know if they're okay? Dumbass. Stupid, selfless dumbass. Don't call them assholes, Kachin, that's mean. He pouted, hands reaching out to swat the blonde. They're your friends too, you know, dash. No, they're not. But Bakugou batted it aside. And don't call me Kachin. Are you hearing yourself right now? His stomach was pooling with frustration and he knew that if he didn't shut up he would probably regret the next words that came out of his mouth, but he couldn't stop himself. Too much anger had built up in such a small amount of time. Kadash. No, because you don't know anything. Stop pretending you do, Deku. You still haven't learned. You still haven't changed. Bakugou felt his eyes twitch. They don't want you. They never did, dash. He stopped when he realized what he had let slip. They never wanted me? No, sheet. That's not what I meant. Then why did you say it? Midoriya was calm. Too calm, as if he had predicted the following actions. I was angry. For wanting a company other than you and my mum. He laughed, however. It sounded so strained that the blonde found himself wincing. My fault, I guess. No, that's not I dash. But he was cut off by the sound of the light bulb sizzling off. The boy had turned off the light. It's getting late. The sun was only just beginning to set. I dash. Midoriya cut him off once more by hiding under the covers and turning around as he did so. Bakugou was in the dark, with a lump in his throat. I'm tired. So, please just leave. He knew that wasn't all he had wanted to say but left it at that. Maybe they weren't intersecting lines anymore, maybe they were just meant to be parallels. Parallels that should have never met. It's been a while, hasn't it, Bakugou? I guess it has. The clock in his therapist's room ticked rhythmically. According to your mum, you've been saying that it's been difficult to get some sleep. Do you know why that is? I never said anything. It must have been pretty obvious if his mother had caught on. If I knew I wouldn't be here, would I, woman? Bakugou knew the reason why. He used to find comfort in watching Midoriya's chest rise and fall. It was a constant reminder that he was well and alive. That he'd been saved. Bakugou never half-arsed anything, and so he'd rest beside him, until the nurses kicked him out. Woefully so, every time the boy closed his eyes, Bakugou was also reminded about death and the fear of Midoriya slipping away, once again. And sleeping near the latter no longer seemed comfortable. She let out a small chuckle. I guess you're right. Tell me something I don't dash. Well, could it be because Freckles has woken up? Their relationship was slowly going downhill, as was expected. Nothing he had ever lasted. What about the nerd waking up? Nerd? You've certainly done a 180 degrees, haven't you? Bakugou didn't answer, and she continued to dig. Perhaps you're unable to sleep because of guilt. He is getting back his memory, according to what you told me 2 weeks ago, and dash. He didn't want to hear the rest of it. Are you just going to keep repeating what I tell you? He groaned. He knew what was causing him distress already, and the presence of Dr. Suzuki was in vain. She couldn't fix him. And he didn't need any fixing. What are my parents even paying you for at this rate? Bakugou. He shut his mouth at the authoritative tone. I'm trying to help dash. Well, you can't help a fed up situation, can you? She paused, the pieces finally connecting at his stricken tone. How exactly did you f up? Dash. He'd opened up. It was an accident, but it was still a screw-up nonetheless. And screw-ups were for the weak. Being weak had no advantages, only several disadvantages that intertwined to make, well, a shittier person. A person with no ambitions. No one, a lack of attention. Had Bakugou not been strong, he'd be nobody. Simply wasting the earth he stepped on and the oxygen he inhaled. Were he not strong, he'd be useless. Pitiful. And being pitiful meant being the weakest part of society. It meant the only thing he'd gain would be wary glances and sad gazes. No one noticed him until he'd been strong. But once they noticed, they wouldn't stop giving him wary glances. The same one reserved for the weak and sad. He was looked at as if he were set to explode at any second, but how was he meant to know that it was fear and not pity? So he set out to be stronger not just physically but mentally. He refused to be broken by simple glances of mere extras. They all thought that he was fragile, that the truth would break him, that reality would break him, that the moment he came to terms with not being the strongest he'd break. But nothing broke Bakugou Katsuki. He had promised himself that much. Nothing. No one. Not even his therapist, who, despite this, was still cautious about which tone to converse with him in. Yet, she still continued to disguise her voice dripping of condescendingness with care. As if she actually cared about him. She was unraveling each layer of heavily crafted skin as if it were nothing. As if the blonde hadn't spent 16 years of his life dedicated to this very armor. And he hated it. Or her, more specifically. Why are you assuming that I did anything? Bakugou knew it was a stupid question to ask. He knew what her answer would be. That he was too harsh and hot-tempered for it to not be him. It was the same answer no matter who he got. Considering the boy just woke up from a coma, forgetting his memories and having only you to confide in, I doubt he would start an argument so easily. After all, you're all he has, right? Or maybe not. The blonde swallowed his pride for a brief second before answering begrudgingly. You know how he's been getting back his memories? He looked at the desk, glaring holes onto it. Bakugou knew he'd hate himself later on for actually talking, as if he didn't already, but that'd be for future him to deal with. Yeah, well, he keeps asking about friends and sheet. He didn't have those. He's so effing close to knowing about the bullying. Why can't you tell him before he finds out? It was recommended that we don't FING say sheet and we just let the shitty memories come back naturally. Ah, I see. That's smart. It prevents psychological damage, right? She coughed into her hands before slamming the files down. Well, that aside. Apologize before he finds out, then. He paused, unsure of how to answer. How do I FING apologize to someone for sheet they don't even know I did? Without telling them I did it. Bakugou felt small being this open, like the room was cramped and the walls were slowly enclosing the two together, preventing him from escaping. Show him that you've changed. Be kinder and dash. I don't know if you've realized this, but I'm anything but kind. She chucked, and somehow that made him feel lighter. Okay, since you're emotional constipated, FOFF. And don't know how to communicate normally, show it with your actions. Actions? And how would I FNG do that? Hypothetically speaking. Sports festival. You told me it was near, with a very creative and a colorful presentation. He had strutted into his session claiming that he'd finally show her his true strength during the festival so that she would stop underestimating him. To be fair, he didn't regret saying it. It was true. Show him that your past doesn't define who you are today. Bakugou, show him that you're a hero. I'll think about it. Bakugou seems a lot tamer nowadays, doesn't he? Raccoon eyes. Shiver me timbers. Watch me. Midoriya looked up, eyes wide and fingers loosening slightly, which caused him to let go of the pole he was holding onto tightly. And this obviously led to him collapsing under his own weight. Ow. He had been practicing walking all day. In fact, Bakugou was even instructed to meet him here instead of his usual tight-spaced, unlit room. This room was vast and definitely lit more clearly. Mirrors scattered the walls, so it was impossible for the blonde not to see himself. I told you to watch me, not fall, idiot. He hissed as he scrambled to help the young boy back up. Sorry. Yeah. Then more quietly he added. Nerd. Midoriya stabilized himself, once more, by grasping the rail and continued taking small steps as he did before. This was no easy feat, and recovery was guaranteed to be painful as he strained himself back into walking regularly, which was why he answered with a wince. Yes, Kachin. I meant what I said about watching me. You better if you watch me out there. But the freckled boy didn't look up to meet his red gaze, nor did he seem entirely enthusiastic. Bakugou frowned. Where? What the do you mean where? The sports festival, dummy? The one we always dash. Right. His lips quickly shut into a thin line. He didn't remember this either. Shove this into my face too, will you? Bakugou blinked, not having heard the phrase uttered. Huh. Nothing. What's the sports festival, anyway? He asked dismissively, spare hand waving him off as the other one continued guiding him. The blonde threw him a scrutinizing look before he started the explanation. Nothing much. But UA holds this large sports event and it gets broadcast on national television. They say it's for every extra, but everyone knows that only the best are just looking at the hero courses. They're the main FING attraction at the end of the day. The boy tensed, and if Bakugou had blinked he would have missed it. Doesn't sound like nothing to me. And his tone almost sounded bitter? But maybe that's just your way of saying you're excited. The silence resumed, unfortunately, Midoriya still advancing in his training and Bakugou offering help every once in a while, just to be rejected every time his outstretched palms prevented the younger of the two from stumbling. He would mutter threads of reassurances such as, I'm fine. Or, Bakugou's favorite, I don't need your help, despite his off-putting footwork. It was nearing the end of their visit when he spoke up again. He was pushing Midoriya in his wheelchair, since he still wasn't suitable for walking on a daily basis, and the young boy was silent as they made their way into his room with his crown of green curls covering his almost closed eyes. I wasn't asking when I told you to watch me back there. The boy hummed in reply. You better watch me be the best FNG hero on that goddamn stage. I'll be so FNG bright that I'll incinerate the FNG pube hair off of them and their prissy family members. I'll even dash. He heard a quiet chuckle and halted, his breath hitching. How long had it been since he heard that sound? It had been short and scarce, but he was sure that he would replay that sound like a new tune added to a playlist. He could live with these crumbs. It was nice. I'll take your word for it. If only Bakugou hadn't missed his sad smile as he tucked him in. Therapist received 8 o'clock. Good luck today, Bakugou. UA's sports festival. Bakugou never understood how 2 words could carry so much weight, but then again he should really stop forgetting the power words held. It was the day that the blonde had been waiting for. The day where all eyes would be on him, and he'd make sure of it. After all, Bakugou was a man on a mission. Bakugou sent 810. Thanks, I guess. And that's why, like every man on a mission, he made a big impromptu speech. I'll sweep the floor with you extras. Keep your eyes on me. Keep your eyes on me as I win this FA festival. Like he said, he needed an attractive impromptu speech. It got the job done. The stadium was alive with roars and complaints, resembling the awakening of ancient spirits whose sleep had been disturbed. The moment the jeers and taunts of his peers also littered his eardrums, he knew that he had successfully riled them up. It wasn't anything he wasn't used to. The attention, that is. His whole life he had shone brightly. Some even said he could rival the sun itself and the Milky Ways that swooned around it. The camera flashes he received when he stepped into the field replicated that action. All eyes were on him. He was the center of the freak show they dared to call a sport festival. It was as if he was sporting thousands of retinas across his bodily form, and the call of attention he desired began weighing on him. The first round had gone without a hitch. But the second round was different. He required members. The team. Bakugou didn't do teams. Bakugou! The blonde snapped his attention to the color red. Want to team up? No, now PSS off. Come on man, you need a team. And the red-haired scanned the crowd of students lingering in the arena. It doesn't exactly look like anyone wants to team up with you. That was true, unfortunately. Bakugou still didn't understand why. Sure, there was a massive bounty to his name, but that was about it. He was a force to be reckoned with. And, ultimately, he would win this tournament, and the faceless extras were wasting an amazing opportunity. Well, what tells you that IFNG want to team up with you? Sheepishly, the student scratched the back of his neck, eyes quickly losing its initial spark of confidence. Nothing really. Just wanted to help you out. There was a string of awkward silence, and the blonde was ready to turn on his heels and go when a hand positioned itself into his shoulder. Look, I really like the whole mysterious and bad boy image you are going for, Bakugou. It's really cool and all, but this is a team exercise and dash. His explanation carried on for a while before Bakugou sighed vehemently, wrapping the 10 million headband on his head. If it'll get you to stop FING yapping like those annoying pissy dogs, then sure, you can join my team. But, you don't have a team? His eyebrows were pursed with a confused smile blessing his features. So, what I'm hearing is that you don't want to join my FING team? Red eyes flared up, wide as he waved his hands frantically in front of him. But Bakugou showed no mercy as he continued. It's fine if you don't want to. I just thought since your dumbass made such a big deal about it dash. That's not it, he then exhaled, a little chuckle vibrating his ribcage. Fine, you win. Bakugou spun around, grumbling once more as he scouted for another extra to recruit when he heard a sudden yell beside him. Guys, Semir. I found our final team member. H? The blonde's jaw hit the ground. What the f... do you mean our? And who said that I was the new FNG member dash? But his cries of distress were overruled by the sudden intrusions of fiddly hands clutching onto him. The red-haired idiots were latching onto him. How'd you get Blondie to agree, Kiri? I'll never make fun of your hair again. Oh, it's the loud one. He's so much quieter in person. I'll show you how to be quieter when I pummeled you 6 feet under, Blondie. Look, you already riled him up. Despite his initial irritation, a small part of him knew what they had this round in the bag. Ambitions were a weird thing, Bakugou thought as he stared at his opponent's limp body. They plagued a person's mind, prodding their brain with the ideas of success, but once it was achieved, a hole replaced the place it used to occupy. An emptiness spoiled Bakugou's stomach as the crowd erupted in cheers, and suddenly he felt extremely sober. He had won. Todoroki's snowflakes seemed to linger in the air, as if securing his victory further. He'd won. With one last look at the camera attempting to capture the expression of victory, Bakugou raised his fist. For all to see. For Deku to see. Still high on adrenaline, he had allowed himself to be whisked away by praises and applause. They led him to the color red first, who embraced him, despite his pink-dusted cheeks. Sorrows and joys no longer bound him, and he found himself feeling as if he was falling. The feelings were too intense for him to wrap his head around. But he couldn't deny the intense wanting. The color red exploited his smiles and broad optimism, luring the blonde into joining the plans of the other contestants, who were all planning on meeting up for a celebratory picnic. Without thinking too much, he nodded numbly and messaged his mum that he'd be out. But he regretted only checking the response 2 hours later. Old hag sent, 6:34. Surprised that you didn't want to spend it with Izuku? Old hag sent, 6:35. Have fun though. Old hag sent, 7:29. Still out, brat? Izuku. He had been selfish again. Sheet. Are you okay, Baku bro? It was a nickname, a stupid nickname, one that shouldn't have made his heart clench the way it did. It shouldn't have torn on his heartstrings for some incomplete reason. But it did, and the blonde knew whose actions they replicated. The entire group had quietened down slightly, and he sighed, hands gripping his hair sharply. Yeah, I just forgot that I had something to do. He exhaled defeatedly. Are you too late? Looked up, the backpack now slung over his shoulder. I hope the if not. Bakugou hadn't evaded the befuddled looks he received from the guards, unfortunately, and the even more annoying and satisfactory smirk planted on the receptionist's face at his wild look when he finally arrived at the hospital half an hour later. Took your time, sweetheart, huh? Almost thought that he wouldn't have any visitors today. The blonde dismissed it characteristically and rushed to the flight of stairs. Even though it's past hours, I'll make an exception just for you, number one. They called out, pushing themselves out of the window just to yell at him, and again, Bakugou ignored them. The stairs to the hospital room seemed to look at him judgmentally. They were provoking him. taunting him. Still, he persevered and soon his steps had slowed as he approached the door. Even before knocking, he knew something was wrong. The corridor was silent and the seat stood agape. Nonetheless, he brushed his inscrutable worries and pushed open the door with his hip. F-. Sorry I'm late but I want to die, Kachin.